I was watching this excellent video here by Paul Whitewick, and what it is he was talking about Walbury Hill, which is right next to Coombe Hill. Walbury Hill is a hill fort, and you know, well, let's just move on to the next bit. But anyway, thank you very much to the person that made bits of this video that I'm using. This guy, they're trying to look at who owns England, because when he went to Walbury Hill, he couldn't go in to that field. It was locked. This video wasn't made very long ago, a few weeks ago, and so he found that going to look at it, it was locked. So it's a bit like comments would say, well, just try and find out who owns the land and ask them if you can use it. And of course it wasn't as easy as that, and then he goes into his story about what he finds, and then he talks to this person here who's written a book about who really owns England. Okay, so all that is absolutely fascinating, but it's also quite upsetting because they're talking about Inkpen Hill. It's just down the road. You know, you think your country is yours, but then you realise it isn't. But he couldn't get in there. I just want to say this. Because they can't tell us what we're really living in and what they've done, it's a bit like they say, oh yes, Walbury Hill is on top of the North Wessex Downs, and in southern England is the tallest point. Yeah, I suppose if you just look at it being on top of the Wessex Downs and then measure it there, and it does say that Inkpen, this Walbury Hill, is the tallest point in southern England. But it's not just that. The Wessex Downs at Swindon, I looked it up, Blunsdon Hill they call it, it's got a peak on it. They don't do peaks for hills, but they do peaks for mountains. And it's very strange because the Wessex Downs, even though they're called downs, and it's quite flat up here. There are hills, but I'm just saying it has to be quite flat because we're living here. But it is on top of that hill with a peak, and the peak is a mountain. So when you think with that high up, and then Coombe Hill with Walbury Hill sits on top of that, that makes it probably the tallest point in England. They won't tell you that. In some places you can find it, it says the tallest point in England. But if you're just going to take, I mean, some people, oh God, there's other hills much taller. Yeah, because they're on a different plateau to us. We're up here on the Wessex Downs. If you're down there, maybe there is other places which are taller. But so it's a bit like the Wessex Downs are the Himalayas, and then on top of that is Everest, and that makes it the tallest mountain. But if you just take Everest itself, it's not. It's because it's on top of the Himalayas, and it's the same thing for Walbury Hill and Coombe Hill. So we're on top of the Wessex Downs, and then they're on top of that. I just thought that was fascinating, but very sad that he couldn't get in to Walbury Hill because it's got a thing in the middle of the field telling you it's the tallest point. And well, probably it's going to say in southern England, but it's probably the whole of England. I know that's crazy. People say, what is she on about? But that's because people haven't done their homework. I mean, you know, when you get to Swindon, there's a great, that's like a mini Grand Canyon up there, and then you drive down, and then you drive down again, and by the time you've gone from the top to the bottom, it's probably a good half a mile that you've driven down and not realised it. That's because we're up here. Nobody's kind of put that together, that we're up here. That's why the clouds are closer and everything. Anyway, so leading into his video, I find it absolutely fascinating that when he's done this, that basically England isn't owned by England, or it's not, these pieces of land aren't registered here, they're registered in other countries. And the fact, I find this very interesting, this talk, so we're just going to put this on. But that's my bit about Walbury Hill. So it is a monument for this country, and it's an old hill fort anyway. So why is it shut off? Why aren't we allowed to go there? Obviously, when he's trying to find out who owns the land, this is his story of what it took, or bits of it, and obviously talking to this guy who's written a book about who owns England. Anyway, let's play the video.
This is a very spectacular Walbury Hill fort. I came here a few weeks ago to walk to the trig point that's up there in the middle of the hill. but I couldn't because what was once permissive access is no longer. I came across that. It's really not private here. Now at this point you guys would normally type in the comments below, we'd just ask the landowner for permission to walk across here. He'd give you permission, and I'm sure he probably would, but it turns out finding out who owns that piece of land isn't as easy as you think.
Hi, I'm Guy Shrubsole. I'm an environmental campaigner and author, and I wrote a book called Who Owns England, which is an investigation into land ownership in this country. Is if it passes from one owner to another via a market transaction. Now there are loads of bits of land in England that have been owned by the same people for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they're just inherited by other family members.
Obviously, I didn't make this video and so forth, but thank you very much to the creator who did. But he's asking these questions about, you know, who's owning the land, and it seems a lot of it is owned by the rich, the dukes, whatever it is, all sort of wrapped up and you can't find and so forth like that. But we'll just listen to a bit more of what he says.
We have this very, very ancient system of land ownership.
Okay, official title register 1495 plus VAT, £17.94 fee. This could become quite an expensive hobby.
Don't understand why it is one of our biggest, deepest, darkest secret as a nation. There is this body, the land registry, but why is it the biggest, deepest, darkest secrets? Probably got to do with the Romans and the fact they've lied to us so much. But why is it the biggest, darkest secrets? Crazy or what, hey? Nobody knows what's happening around them at all.
So it's ridiculously hard to find out who owns land in England. It's one of our biggest, deepest, darkest secrets as a nation. There is this body, the Land Registry, which is meant to have a record of who owns all the land in England and in Wales as well. It has 24 million registered land titles. You have to pay £3 to see a single land title. So that's fine if you only want to look up who owns, you know, a field here or a moorland there. If you try to find out the answer to who owns all of England, you're paying £72 million, and Wales as well, obviously. But you know, that's like more than I have to be able to investigate this as a hobby. And actually, also, the Land Registry isn't actually complete. It's been around since 1862, but it still hasn't finished the job of registering all the land in England and Wales. So only about 85% of land is actually registered.
It sounds to me like they've made it so complicated, it's almost impossible to find out who owns what, and it's all done on purpose, and that's the way they want it.
So I just got really intrigued by this question of who owns land, and then I started to discover how difficult it was to find out who owns land in England. I sort of thought, what have they got to hide? You know, you look at something like who owns companies. Since 2012, Companies House, that's all been open. You don't have to pay any money to find out who owns a company. Who owns land is a totally different matter. It's kind of surrounded by this sort of mist, this fog of secrecy. And that's something that I found really intriguing because it's all bound up with wealth and power and protecting that wealth and power. Started a blog, whoownsengland.org, and then that turned into a book. Yeah, still trying to answer that question, but ultimately it's a question that the UK government could answer very easily just by opening up the land registry and making it free for people to use, just as they have done with Companies House. And I can say pretty confidently that less than 1% of the population own half of all England. And that's a staggering level of inequality of ownership, and that's another reason why I think it's really interesting to investigate this.
Well, for me, living in Berkshire, thank God the council have modernised everything, because their planning department was terrible about 20 years ago. Absolutely terrible. Now, they seem to have put things on, he tells you what it is. They've actually recorded it differently. Yes, he's saying that they've digitalised all the maps, but, you know, when I was dealing with it with a property that I had in Hungerford, there was no information and it was all over the place and it was a right sham. But obviously they've modernised it a bit for everyone, thank God for that. But still allowing all these people from other countries, well, registering the land in other countries. How can that be? But anyway, let's carry on with the video.
I got hold of them for West Berkshire. In fact, West Berkshire Council had very handily digitised all these maps, so it was actually really easy to then analyse it, look at the area of land that each of the landowners own, and work out that 30 of them own half of the whole county.
So let's have a look at the map for the area that we're stood in today. Who owns Walbury, Hillfort and that surrounding area? Now Guy's map states it's the Kirby House estate. Now the land title seems to be registered under a company called Walbury Hill Properties. Now when you go on Company's House, well, I can't find that company, maybe it's not trading. Either way, in the news there's an article from the Independent which states that the Astor family purchased this property in the 1950s. Okay, so if we can't find out using that, well, we can perhaps look at the environmental stewardship records. What exactly are they?
Another way to try and find out who owns land in your area is to look at the farm payments, the farm subsidies that many farmers and landowners get from the government. In particular, there's been a scheme called environmental stewardship that has run in the past. It doesn't actually run now anymore. There's a whole new system post-Brexit.
Obviously you've got to have sheer determination to find all this information, as you can see what you've got to do, because you can't find who owns the land, but you can find through certain things who's got the land because their names will be there. But isn't that crazy? I mean, it's not like you think, hey, I own this bit of land, and when I look out the window half the nation's standing there on my fields. It's not about that. It's about secrecy of everything. Things should be a little bit more public. You know, that family's owned it since the medieval times or whatever, so what? Why can't we know those things? You know, and they're owning lots of land we can't walk on and shutting places off we're allowed to go to. It's now locked and everything, like in lockdown or something. No, let's carry on with the video.
But you can still use it, you can still access the data online, the maps, and often that will give you a clue as to who might own the land. So that's something else I've tried to do on Who Owns England, is to take some of these maps, investigate the kind of people who are receiving the public money, the farm subsidy, and then trace back through sort of companies or other individuals who might own that land.
This is the bit where he's going to explain that Walbury Hill and a piece of land just a mile, say, away or 2 miles away aren't registered in this country. They're registered in other countries. And he's got a bit of an opinion here about what he feels. I mean, I don't like this system, but in this system we pay taxes. So he's saying these people should be paying taxes in England. But it just seems that with everything the government tells you, how come everybody's funneling the money out of the UK, not into the UK, out of it. What's going on?
Now the environmental stewardship maps show this place to be run by a company called Lily Farms Limited. And when you search for those, there are some Astor family members in there. All good, all above board, but this is where my trail kind of stops, because from what I can tell from the research, it looks like the ultimate holding company is Riviera Holdings Limited, and they're registered in the Bahamas.
Firstly, I just think it's really odd, isn't it, to think that there are chunks of England that are basically owned in the Bahamas or the Cayman Islands, probably to preserve the identity of the ultimate owner. A lot of these offshore jurisdictions, places like the Channel Islands, the British Virgin Islands, they're sort of quite notorious for having companies that are based there, perhaps because of the company law in those countries allowing greater secrecy about who the ultimate owners are. Perhaps also because those jurisdictions have favourable tax regimes. But we can of course only speculate about the reasons for why an individual or company might be based in those countries. But
the statistics are quite amazing, really, about the fact that you think that you own a lot with your garden and everything, but when he's talking, it's such a small part of land owned by the houses. It's much more, nearly all of it is owned by the dukes and barons and earls and you know, all the rich lot. Quite incredible.
Certainly raises some interesting questions about what's going on.
Okay, so if we think that's unique, why don't we try scrolling up to the next parcel of land that Guy's mapped to the northwest of where we are, just a couple of miles by the looks of it, and we've got a piece of land, quite a significant chunk of land, owned by the Hungerford Park estate at Hungerford. When we go onto Guy's website, he's already done the research for us. It looks like their company is registered in Luxembourg. Why would you have a company registered in Luxembourg?
Homes and domestic gardens take up 5% of England. Who owns the other 95%? That's the interesting question for me. You know, the stats that I presented in my book is that, rough estimate, 30% of England still belongs to the aristocracy. You know, a big chunk also belongs to what I sort of refer to as new money. There's about 18% owned by companies, both those registered in the UK and those registered in other countries, offshore, overseas countries. You know, all of middle England, if you like, people who are lucky enough to own our own homes. That's the tiny amount of land that we ultimately own is vastly outweighed by a few thousand dukes and barons and members of the aristocracy.
And go and see some of these ancient landscapes that are currently just sort of blocked off by big swathes of estates.
For me, I think this is really sad that we can't go on top of the hill fort and see this plaque which is there. Like, it's not like millions of people go there every day or whatever it is. Maybe it's a few people every day. But, you know, it's beautiful up there. It's part of our history. It's all shut off from us. Let's just carry on with this video. But I just find that very sad. To me, you know, I love that place. You know, we've done it to Silbury Hill. I understand Silbury Hill because the top collapsed in, the capstone collapsed in. And it's, you know, it's a flat capstone, but was a hole at the top. So, and that's because they've gone in there so many times. You know, they've probably done it to make sure in the end the whole thing will collapse. But because it is slowly collapsing, they stop people walking up there. But, you know, it's not that you don't want the land kept good for the history. But round the back of Walbury Hill, you can see these great big tanks in the ground, like old military stuff probably. But I wonder if they're partly to do with it. You can see it, or maybe they've cut it out on Google Maps. I've seen it loads of times. These great big tanks in the ground. Yeah, something like that probably.
More democratic say over how our land's used, and also had more access to it as well. I'd love us to have a community right to buy here. Scotland has enjoyed community right to buy for the last 20 years. It's led to thousands of communities across Scotland beginning to own land collectively. I'd love there to be a right of responsible access to the English countryside. We only have a right to roam over about 8% of it currently.
If you own a company in this country, well then you should absolutely pay tax in this country. This is a YouTube channel, it pays tax in this country. I'm not going to set up Paul Whitewick Inc., stick it in the Bahamas or Luxembourg and hope for some tax-free dividends or whatever you would do to save tax. Number two, if you receive subsidies from the land, the environmental stewardship in this country, well again you should pay tax in this country. Some of the larger estates that go back quite a long way and how they operate their land, the worst case, well, it needs more questions answered. Number three, this isn't really a sort of a entitled rant. I don't want to own a whole bunch of land. This isn't me saying I own that tiny bit, I'd like to own my fair share. Far from it. This is me saying that I would like to see this land managed in a way that benefits all. Yes, food production, security of land, hugely important, but the vast swathes of estate land, what are we doing with those and how does that benefit everybody?
I'd like to thank Paul Whitewick for making this video and bringing to our attention how difficult it is to find any information about anything, but I suppose that's what our life is, isn't it really? It's all just shrouded with the mystery. Thank you very much for that and pointing out you can't get on Walbury Hill. That's very sad for me, I think, but thank you very much to this creator and for that guy there talking as well about all that stuff. Anyway, it's just another point of view, and obviously when I see things I like to show people. Hopefully he doesn't mind me sharing a bit of his video, but obviously his video is longer and has a bit more stuff in it. But thank you very much to him, thank you very much to everybody for watching this video.